Lately I've been wondering, why does the fantasy or sci-fi genre tickle some part of the brain so well for those of us who are tickled by it? Is it just the sum of the movies, shows, books, or just general stories we watched as kids? Growing up in the early 2000s, I remember watching, reading, consuming media that felt normal, like Ned's Declassified or Zoe 101. Those were normal. They existed in my understanding of what could happen potentially to me, even though they were over-the-top sorts of skits. But there was a distinct difference between watching shows like that and this other, more special genre and the experience I got from watching things like Ella Enchanted, Harry Potter, Matilda, Twitches, Spy Kids 3D, Bridge to Terabithia, Code Lyoko, Halloween Town, The Walking Dead, which I started watching very young. So all of these shows had a different sort of visceral reaction for me. Watching an episode of Zoe 101 was not the same feeling as watching the Zathura movie, and feeling like I was totally swept away is escapism in a different way that those regular shows set in my normal reality could never touch. So I went to Reddit and tried to see what other people thought about why do they read fantasy or sci-fi. What is it about this genre in particular that moves us so deeply that other genres seem to not be able to do? According to Evergreen Havoc, genres focus on evoking different primary emotions, and fantasy is a genre built to primarily evoke wonder, like sci-fi. It also lives with other exploration genres, travel, nature, etc., but the point is to generate wonder. That can be through moments of adventure, clever tricks, pure magical escapism, or a focus on appreciating the ordinary within the fantasy space. But that moment is somewhere in the mix. What interested me about this comment was the description of the evocation of wonder. I feel like ACOTAR is a really great example of this. If you've watched any of my other videos, you might know that in the past, I've loved ACOTAR and then said that I hated it, and I think at this moment, I really do appreciate it. I did a reread of the first book this year and then reread half of the second one. If you don't know about ACOTAR, which you probably do, there's a girl who is a human who goes into the fairy realm, and in this realm, there are different lands that represent different seasons and days, where the fairies that occupy these lands have different powers that match with their landscape / season / time of day. So there's the fall court, spring, winter, summer court, the day court, night court, and the dawn court. So without going into the entire story of ACOTAR, but just the premise of having these like very specific lands and the powers that are correlated to those lands, that produced a lot of wonder to me. The actual plot of ACOTAR isn't so different than a normal romance novel and the beats that it hits, but placing it in this fantastical world did create a huge sense of wonder. And when we got to explore more of that world more deeply, I was continuously more intrigued with the plot because of the setting. Whereas if that setting wasn't there, I don't know if I would feel the way that I do about the series, but having this magical element is what keeps me going back to the series. I do also just enjoy the romance plot, but putting it in this world is what makes it an experience of wonder, additionally to experience of I'm having fun in a romance story. Dist Genius says, I think fantasy is one of the best ways to explore themes that can be difficult to do in other fiction. Perdido Street Station is an example of what I mean. It gets into economic and political themes, the concept of individual agency, crime and punishment, and other topics that aren't necessarily easy to talk about. The fantasy trappings help give the reader a bit of distance from the topics and engage with them in a less reactionary way than if it was straight fiction, set in Victorian London. The Library at Mount Char is another one that I keep thinking about months and years later because it uses the world building of its fantasy take on Earth to explore ideas. Series like The First Law, Thomas Covenant, or Kushiel's Legacy have a lot to say, and even if I don't agree with all they have to say, or even anything they have to say, it is a lot easier for me to take what the book says at face value, ponder it for a while, and then try to bounce it off my own worldview when I'm not bringing real-world politics or catastrophes or social norms into that internal discussion until I've had some time to be engaged with the topic. Sci-fi can do a similar thing, but there's a difference to me. Sci-fi often looks forward or focuses more on the idea of what if X when it engages in that kind of discussion with the reader. What if society became X? What if computers could do Y? What if some event precipitated a change in the status quo? Fantasy typically is more just, this is the world these characters live in, and then explores how that world works. or doesn't, and instead focuses on the why things are the way they are. It lets the characters interact and be part of the world, which lets me as the reader ask the questions instead. It's not that I can't read for escapism or wonder, but I keep reading fantasy hoping to find more books that stick with me for a long time. Along the way, I find some pretty good stories, every now and then some poor ones, and once in a while, something that smacks me upside the head and demands my attention. I keep reading fantasy for those occasional head smacks, because they stop me from getting complacent in my own little view of the world. Now, I loved this response. I thought it captured the way that I feel about fantasy and sci-fi really well. So looking for an example of this in my life right now, I thought about the Red Rising series because I have been absolutely obsessed and gripped with this for the past, I want to say 2 weeks. I read the first book in March, didn't really love it. For some reason, went back and tried the second book. Absolutely amazing. Got super obsessed. Started the third book yesterday, and I'm already, I think, 108 pages in. In Red Rising, you explore some despicable characters. There's a hierarchy of colors where gold people are at the top, reds are at the bottom, there's a bunch of colors in between, and your color denotes what social class that you have in this society that, by the way, is in space. Humans have colonized all of the solar system, so it's a massive world. These hierarchies and social classes dissect some of the social class inequities in our reality, but they also just explore human nature in a very interesting way that I don't think I've ever really gone through with another book personally. The hierarchy of the color system and the way different people in different social classes behave and react to or commit brutality functions differently according to their classes. We love and root for our main character, Darrow, but we love him for his purpose of overthrowing a corrupt system. But overthrowing the system means that Darrow also has to commit atrocities, making him arguably just as bad as others around him, but he has a different purpose. You see characters commit unforgivable crimes, but who are sometimes forgiven and sometimes not. Some characters are given second chances, others aren't, and some of those second chances are totally abused and they come back even worse than before, and some of the second chances are warranted, and you get a fantastic character who is super loyal for the rest of the series. This series made me consider ideas of loyalty, crime, punishment, and betrayal in a way that no other book has. Seeing the characters in a truly unorthodox, unfamiliar, foreign fictional setting, I see people in a way that societal context sometimes doesn't allow me to see them if something is too close to my lived reality. Worldly Instance 730 says, "My reason is because I live an average life, so I want to read something completely removed from reality." I also really understand this point as well. Living an average life, I see the draw of wanting to live something super fantastical. I find myself reading literary fiction or quieter books when I'm in quieter points of my life. At this point in my life, I'm in my final semester before I graduate. I'm working almost full-time. I'm doing my YouTube videos, I'm writing a book. I have a lot of things going on. I come home very tired, and nothing sounds more relaxing to me than reading about 7-foot, 8-foot tall golden humans slashing, bashing, fighting, and betraying each other in space. That's just what makes me feel like I'm gonna have a cozy good night. In this chaotic and sleep-deprived point of my life, I want something action-packed and exciting. I've always loved good fight scenes and having a lot of action. That's why The Walking Dead is one of my favorite pieces of media ever, because you would hardly expect that a zombie show would be as emotional and as impactful and exploratory of human nature as it is, but it just works. It just shows such universal human truths about what we will do to survive, what is left after we have survived, how can we work together. It's just so good. Another piece of media I really like is The Bear, but that is a super realistic show. It's about restaurant workers and how their lives are in and outside of the restaurant and how they interact with each other, and it is a fantastic show. But at this time in my life, watching an episode of The Bear after I record this video, before I go to sleep and have to do more work tomorrow, doesn't sound super relaxing to me. Having their problems added onto my problems at this point in my life sounds like almost another burden. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe if I watched the first episode again, I would be like, oh, screw it. I love the show. This is gonna be so good again. Because ultimately, it's still fiction. All fiction is escapism. But I think sci-fi and fantasy have this additional layer of going beyond the general escapism because it is just so foreign to what you can experience. Your problems and the characters' problems have nothing external in common. Internally, they can have a ton in common. So after doing my Reddit search, I looked around on Google Scholar, didn't find anything that I was willing to pay for to include in this video, but I did do some research on Discovery Kids, I think it was, or Nat Geo Kids, one of the two. When I think of fantasy and sci-fi, this is also including superheroes, so I thought, when was the first superhero? And that was the Phantom in 1936, and then Superman followed 2 years later, 1938, and he is just the prime example of us, but better. We want to read stories about humans that can do more than us. And then Batman is kind of the antithesis of that, where Superman is born to be more than human. He is literally superhuman, and Batman is just a human who just maxes out his human capabilities. So then I wanted to go even further back into before superheroes, and I thought of witchcraft, fairy tales. In the Odyssey, when Circe is introduced, she's described as a witch. So even further back then, you can go and say that fantasy started with like Norse, Roman, Greek, Celtic mythology, and just these attempts to explain phenomena by using humans who are just a little bit more godlike creatures. And it seems that for all of time, we have loved stories about people like us who feel things just like us, but who can do a little bit more. I think there's something very special about the cocktail of having something that can't happen at all and something that always happens, as in a universal truth of the human experience, put together, that makes fantasy and sci-fi such a unique experience that other genres just can't touch. And that is why fantasy and sci-fi will always be my favorite genres. That can change, but I love them. I'd love to hear if you could give me reasonings as to why you love those genres, if you do, and if you don't love those genres, reasons for that too. Why you like reading in general? Why is fiction so valuable to us? Thanks for watching the video so far. I would love it if you liked or commented or subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one.